Hi class, welcome to Unit 8. Unit 8 is called Utah History in the 20th Century. Now, when we say 20th century, what we really mean is just the 1900s, just that entire century in the 1900s. Now, this unit functions a little bit different than our other units. Now, to this point, you've been looking at a lot of lessons, like there'll be some reading, maybe some video clips to watch, some questions, and you'll have the same kind of thing, except for there will be less reading. For this unit, I will walk you through the material, and I do that because that's the way we do it in class, and it's a little bit easier for the students when I can help you to see what the material is saying rather than you reading it, and it's a little bit more fun when you have somebody that can explain it to you and be excited about it with you, because I have to say this is one of my very favorite units. What's happened so far up to this point in Utah history is Utah has become a state. So we know all about the people that settled Utah, we know about the Native Americans, we know about what happened, and now last unit you learned about how Utah became a state. What happens at this point in Utah history is Utah history becomes U.S. history. So really, once Utah is integrated as a real state, just the stuff that happens in America as part of American history becomes Utah history. So in this unit, we're going to learn a lot about American history, and that will help us to know what happened in Utah. Now, so we will be talking about like major events in the 1900s, and then we'll be talking about how Utah relates to those major events. So sometimes I have students that get confused like halfway through the unit, and they say, oh, I thought this was a Utah history class. Why are we learning this? But I'm telling you right now that this is a Utah history class, but we're learning this because Utah history becomes U.S. history. So I want that to be very clear for you so you're not confused. So what we're going to do is there is a specific way I like to teach the 1900s, and what we're going to do is introduce that to you today so that way you understand this way that you're going to be taught the 1900s. And we're going to use a specific lens or like a specific theme to teach this U.S. history, and then we'll look at Utah history as well. So we're going to start with our lesson objectives like we always do. We're going to have our I can statements. I can define pop culture, and then I can relate history with pop culture. That's what we're going to be doing today. So let's get started. All right, now I flip the screen and you're going to see a lot of different things here. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and identify as many different pictures as you can. On your mark, get set, go. Okay, what did you see? You probably saw a lot of things that you recognize and a lot of things that you don't recognize. But there are things that are like look older, but still things that are used today. Some of the favorites kids like to say is Mr. Potato Head. They recognize the We Can Do It, Rosie the Riveter, Play-Doh, Rubik's Cube, Frankenstein, Tricks and Gumby. There's a smiley face. So there's a lot of different things you can see in the picture. Oh, McDonald's, Wendy's, that's a very classic one people always mention. Now, if we give a name to all of these things, what do you think that name would be? What's like something that is all of these things, the word that describes all of them? Well, that word would be pop culture. So what you're looking at on the last slide is pop culture. Now, pop culture is short for popular culture. Can you think about what pop culture means? Think about that for just a second. I have a definition on the next slide, but you're probably thinking things like, well, popular culture is stuff that's popular, that the kids know about. Maybe it's trendy, and you would be correct. Now, here's the definition of pop culture. Pop culture is modern popular culture transmitted via mass media and aimed particularly at younger people. So when we say the word transmitted via, it just means like sent through mass media. Mass media is like the kind of like social media and other media forms that you consume. Like who's telling you what's cool in society? That's like what mass media is. And then we have in the last part of the definition, who likes pop culture? Who knows the pop culture? Is it the boomers in this society? Well, no. It's the young people. It's your age and it's older. It's the teenagers. It's like the tweens, I guess, the young adults that know what is cool in society. So can you think of certain categories and examples of pop culture? Now, we had some specific examples of pop culture on the last slide, but I'm asking you, can you think of any categories? Some that you might be thinking of is you might think music or movies or books or celebrities or fashion or clothing or slang or technology, all these kind of things and many more would be considered pop culture. Like, what do the kids know about? What are they doing? Oh, and we can't forget this one. How about video games? That's a huge one in society that the young people know of. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to learn history by looking at pop culture. That's the theme for this next unit. So let's look at the relationship between history and pop culture. I have two things I want you to recognize. And they'll be labeled number 1 and number 2. So the first thing I want you to know about the relationship between history and pop culture is this. If you understand history, you will understand pop culture because pop culture has many references to history. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what this means. This means that if you know your history, like you know facts and details about history, you know why something happened, you know what happened, you know the cause and effect. If you know that kind of stuff about history, then pop culture, all that stuff we talked about before, makes more sense to you. So what does this mean? Well, let's look at an example. The example I have for you is from the movie The Lion King. Now, you've probably seen this. You might have seen the animated version, and the clip I'm going to show you is from the animated. You might have seen the live action that came out a while ago. But this movie, The Lion King, has a great example of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to flip to the next slide and give you an instruction for how to see the video clip. Okay, so during this unit, you're going to see a slide like this come up because there's a lot of video clips that go with our unit. Now, I don't know a way to record us watching the video clip together. It didn't work when I tried it. So I'm going to have to ask you to do this. When you see this screen coming up, I want you to push pause on this video, and I want you to go back to the Canvas lesson that you came from, and I want you to watch the video clip labeled clip number 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever it is. So what you're going to do right now is when I tell you to, pause this video, go back to Canvas, and go to where it says video clip number 1. And that will take you to the Lion King clip I want you to see. Now, I want to tell you one more thing about the Lion King clip before I tell you to go watch it. And the thing is this. I want you to look for the Nazis in the Lion King clip I'm going to show you. So I want you to look for, did you know that there are Nazis in the Lion King? Pause this video right now and go watch that clip. Okay, so at this point, you should have watched the video clip. Did you see the Nazis? Did you see them? Well, they should have been the hyenas. If you're watching closely, there was a scene where you saw the hyenas kind of marching like troops, and they are supposed to represent the Nazis. Now, is this just like some kind of fan fiction somebody made up? Like they're like, oh, watching The Lion King one day, and they're like, oh, well, that looks like Nazis, so I think it's Nazis. Well, no, it's not. The actual Disney animators put that scene into The Lion King so you would think of Nazis, and it would help you to understand their movie better. So they're connecting this history with their pop culture. Now let me explain how that clip showed you Nazi hyenas. Okay, so one thing that you may have noticed is you may have noticed that the hyenas were walking a certain way. The way that they were walking is actually called goose stepping. Did you see how they were walking? Here's like a little GIF you can see of this. They were walking with their paws completely outstretched. Now, that is called goose stepping. And this is the way that the Nazi soldiers would walk. So I'm going to flip and I want the screen, and it's going to show you a little GIF of the Nazi soldiers walking. And look how similar this is. The way they're walking is they don't bend their knees when they walk, and that's how they would march in the formation. So this was called goose stepping because that's kind of like how a goose walks. So that's one way you can know that the hyenas were supposed to represent the Nazis. And you can see, obviously, they're in like a formation for like army troops here, right? Just kind of like the clip you see on the right-hand side. Now, the next thing I want to tell you is when the Disney animators animated this, they actually put in some like references to a video called Triumph of the Will. Now, this video was a German video that the German Nazi recruiters would show people that they wanted to be Nazis, and they would say like, look, Nazis are so cool, you should be a Nazi too. And it was called Triumph of the Will. Now, in this video, it showed a bunch of Nazi troops marching. And I want to show you a clip from the Lion King right here. Do you see that picture Do you see how Scar is positioned? So obviously they're marching in front of him, right? The Nazi hyena troops, but he's positioned higher than them. That was intentional because anytime that Hitler would be in the crowd and they would be marching past Hitler, he would be higher than they would be. Now, some people, when they see this picture on the right-hand side, they think Hitler is the one in the top. He's like in the balcony, I guess, of the building, but that's actually just pedestrians. He's the one in the very, very front here on top of the car. So what they would do is he would always be elevated so people could see him. It was a position of power. So the Disney animators made Scar in the same position of power, elevated above the troops, that Hitler was in this video. And there's a couple more things I want to point out about this. Did you see in the video, and you can kind of see in the picture, what the hyenas are doing when they pass Scar? So they would be like marching normally with their head like facing forward, and then you could see in the video clip that as soon as they passed Scar, they turned to look at him, right? Well, this is exactly what the Nazi troops would do when they would pass Hitler. They would be marching with their head forward like in regular military fashion, and then as soon as they passed Hitler, they would turn and look at him. It was a way that they did of honoring Hitler, and then they would just turn to face the front when they passed him already. And there's one more thing I want to show you about this video clip here. Okay, so in the video, you saw what was called the Cathedral of Light. If you went to a Nazi rally, you would see this. A rally is like a place, like if you were a Nazi and you wanted to go get pumped up about being a Nazi, you would go to a rally, right? It was like a place where you could celebrate being a Nazi. It sounds horrible to say, but they had a specific thing called the Cathedral of Light there, and it was very recognizable at these rallies. So here, do you see how Scar is above the hyenas on that pedestal right there, that like little rock thing, I guess? And do you see how there's light beams behind him? If you actually go back and watch the clip, you'll hear there's like a sound that comes on, like a big lantern is being lit, and then this light shines, and that was intentional by these Disney animators. Well, on the right-hand side, you can see the Cathedral of Light. They would hang a curtain, and they would project light beams onto the curtain in the background. So you're seeing like there's the people in the front in the crowd, and then there's like the podium for people to stand and speak and stuff, and then the Cathedral of Light is behind them. And that's specifically what they would call that. So these Disney animators, they really did their homework in trying to figure out how they can have you think about Nazis when you're seeing the hyenas. So the question is, why would they do this in the video? What does it say about the Lion King if they want you to think Nazis? And if they want you to think Hitler when you see Scar? Well, it does a lot for the plot of their movie. If you remember, Scar says to the hyenas, he says, "Stick with me and you'll never go hungry again," right? So he's making all these promises. He's saying, "Follow me and I will bring you food. I will do the best that I can for you." And those were actual real promises that Hitler made. He said, if you vote for me and you support me, well, and actually people didn't vote for Hitler, but he said, if you support me, then I will support you. And you'll have food for your family, and you'll be okay if you do that. It was the same kind of promises. Now, why they threw this in there is, doesn't it kind of make Scar seem a little bit more evil if you know he's supposed to be like Hitler? It does to me. If you know the hyenas are supposed to be like blind following Nazis, and you know that Scar is supposed to be like Hitler, it kind of makes him seem just like way more evil now that you know that. So really, they really wanted you to see Scar as evil, and because they were like, look, the guy's kind of like Hitler, and that really kind of changes the story. And I'm sorry if Lion King is ruined for you now, but it shouldn't be ruined. It should like enhance your experience, but you'll never be able to not see the Nazis when you see the hyenas now, so you're welcome. The joys of history class. Okay, let's move on to our second point here. The second thing I want you to see is this. Number 2, if you look at the pop culture of a particular time period, it shows you what was happening in history at that time. History influences pop culture. Okay, so let's review number 1. Number 1 said, if you understand history, then you'll understand pop culture because pop culture references history. And number 2 says, if you look at the pop culture of a time period, then it will show you what was happening in history at that time, which is actually pretty cool. So let's talk about what that actually means. So this means if you were to go back to the 1930s and you wanted to know what was happening in history, there would be some really good clues about what was happening in the 1930s in the pop culture. So what that means for today is if you went to 2020 and you looked at the pop culture of today, it would show you some of the things that were going on. So like a century from now, a historian could go back to 2020 and this decade and they could say, oh, like what did kids like at that time, and what does that show us about what was happening in history and in society? And there's some really cool connections once we start to do this. Well, this unit, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at the pop culture, and we're going to be saying, what can we learn about the history by looking at the pop culture? And it's kind of fun to learn about the pop culture of the past and to see what came around and when it came around. So during this unit, what we're going to do is we're actually not going to do 1910s and 1920s. We're going to start with 1930s, but I did put the 1910s and 20s in here because I want you to see, well, that's obviously part of the 1900s, okay? We're going to start 1930s. We're going to go to 1940s, 50s, 60s, and then 70s and 80s came after that, but we're just going to stick with the main 4 decades in this. So 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And that's going to help us to understand a little bit more about what was happening in U.S. history and Utah history by looking at the pop culture. So this is the end of the lesson. Here we go. I hope you have a great day.